everyone, join me, Megan Rinks.
And me, Melissa DeMonts, for Don't Blame Me, But Am I Wrong?
Each week, we deliver 4 fun-filled shows.
In Don't Blame Me, we tackle our listeners' dilemmas with hilariously honest advice.
Then we have But Am I Wrong, which is for the listeners that didn't take our advice. Plus, we share our hot takes on current events.
Then tune in to see you next Tuesday for our listener poll results from But Am I Wrong?
And finally, wrap up your week with Fisting Friday, where we catch up and talk all things pop culture.
Listen to Don't Blame Me, But Am I Wrong on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well-being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how.
I'm delighted to be here. It's always nice to have conversations, even if they're in virtual kitchens. It's a good place to talk.
Yes, I like that. I like that a lot. So, vegan family kitchen, that is my introduction to you. You are so much more than that, of course, but that is how I came across your work. So, I would love to start maybe with your vegan journey and we can go from there.
One funny thing about Vegan Family Kitchen is that most of the people I work with are not vegan and they're not families. And Vegan Family Kitchen is really more about me than it is about the people I work with. But yeah, I came to this in 2013 was when I started looking at the environmental footprint of my food. I come from a line of dairy farmers. At least my mother's father had a dairy farm. After he passed, my father was in charge of the dairy farm for a while. And thankfully, by the time I was born, they were not into dairy anymore. My parents had a pig farm for a short time, but then they moved to, they had a garden center for many years. I think my dad, in his heart of heart, he loved animals. And I think, first of all, he was scared of the big animals, right? Because it's often dangerous. But also he probably did not like what happens at the end part. And that's my background. I'm a very unlikely vegan. But I came from the countryside, but I loved urban life. And I became really interested in issues of urban planning and sustainability and how we can make this all work in a small planet. And one of my big things was bike commuting. And if you think vegans are righteous, anybody listening, you haven't met a bike commuter. And you put your life on the line every day, sometimes when you're going to work in different environments. And it's quite a tight-knit community of cycling warriors with a lot of online kind of wars in the same way that you will find the same themes in vegan, right? So that was my background. And one day in 2013, I had somebody on the internet tell me, yeah, if you're fueling your bike commute with steak, you might as well be driving a Hummer.
Damn.
And that was really painful for me. I did not like hearing that as somebody who was a lifelong environmentalist, but who also really enjoyed rare steak and blue cheese. And I'm guessing that person was vegan. I don't know who they are, but thank you for saying your bit that day. And I'm sure on the spur of the moment, I did not react in a positive way, but it made its way through me. And I think that was a shame involved in me in realizing, goodness gracious, I've never really thought about that. I thought I was pretty thorough and I knew my stuff, and whoops, I'd never thought about this. And so I started digging into the issue. I happened to have a former colleague who had just coincidentally published a book on the topic of animal agriculture, it was not a close friend, but somebody I respected. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I read her book and I was like, oh, I've been missing out on a lot. Against my personal preference, because as I said, I loved steak and cheese and all those things, I decided I would go plant-based at home. That would be my first step. I'll take one for the team and I'll go there. And that lasted for quite a while, a little bit, almost 2 years. And somewhere in there, I became pregnant with my second child. And I knew, I said I come from a line of dairy farmers. I knew where milk came from, right? I knew that the cows had to have a baby. Some people think cows make milk like apple trees make apples, right? But it's not like that. The cows have to get pregnant first and they have a baby and the baby gets taken away. My mother has told me a few times how she did not like it on the day when her father was taking the baby cows away, because the cows would cry all day long and for multiple days. And it was heartbreaking and annoying at the same time from her perspective. So I knew all that. But there in the night, when I had my second child and I was nursing him the same way I had nursed my first, but my first was a girl. And then I was nursing my son, and it came to me that he was a boy. And if I was a cow and I had a baby boy, the baby boy would be taken away from me. A baby girl would be taken away too, but with slightly longer life expectancy. And he would be, slaughtered, and so that my milk could be harvested. And that was in the middle of the night when you have a newborn and you're up at all hours. You get like hallucinations almost sometimes from lack of sleep, right? But I woke up that morning after having a little bit of sleep and I was like, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I can't continue to even occasionally say, it's okay, I'll just have a little bit of milk or I'll have a little bit of cheese. Or I just became a strict vegan at that time. And that was really my epiphany moment to realize that and again, that's shame. And often we say shaming is not good. We shouldn't shame people. And it's true. But I also think different strokes for different folks, different kinds of activism will work for different people. And for me, shame worked. It was the realization that I was not living in a way that I could feel integrity relative to my principles and to the values I was carrying. So that's my journey into vegan. And what happened next is that I thought I should give myself a public identity as a vegan, and that will make me accountable. And I had started playing with different business ideas at that stage. I knew I was not going to go back to my academic job after my second child's parental leave was over. And I had started doing a few different things, and I was like, maybe I'll just put vegan in my business name. And the first name was not Vegan Family Kitchen. It was something else, but it had the word vegan in it. I was like, that way it will keep me honest to my resolution of not only eating vegan food, but also being vegan in my life. And there we are. My son is now 9 years old. So it's been about 9 years.
Wow, what a powerful moment and connection to make in such a vulnerable time too, that I'm sure it felt like you almost couldn't ignore that. How powerful.
Totally. Yeah. And I think in terms of activism, if anybody's listening that comes at this from that lens, I think mothers are definitely a group of people that we can, in terms of vegan activism, it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Because I think a lot of mothers these days have breastfed their children, have had that experience, and can have that connection with dairy cows. And the same principle with hens. We're not eating baby chickens when we eat eggs, but we're really exploiting the female reproductive system. And we're exploiting hens because they're mothers, not because they're chickens. And so when I think women who have had children are a lot more likely to connect the dots, which doesn't mean that it's easy for them to change. There's so much social friction and potential conflict involved in making those decisions. But I think the women have the potential to be vectors of change in that way, because they have a natural inclination, if they've had children, to have that compassion in them. Something to think about.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I almost hate to use the word leverage, but the leverage point, because let me draw on the experience that you will directly relate with to this issue.
Yeah. And the very first thing I did in my business was, before Vegan Family Kitchen, I organized an event because, again, this dairy thing was so vivid to me. And I organized my first event that was called Dairy Free Living. And I had this vision and it turned out true. It was so fun. We had a plant milk tasting and a plant cheese tasting and a plant ice cream tasting. It was a nice spring day in Vancouver, and I had
Yum.
a couple of speakers, somebody speaking more on the animal rights aspect and somebody speaking more to the nutrition dimensions. And the interesting thing is that the biggest part of the crowd, of the 100-something people that were there, had been sent to me by the women's hospital in Vancouver, because a lot of newborns have some form of dairy intolerance. And if they are preemies, it can be life-threatening. And at the Vancouver Women's Hospital, we have a by donation milk bank, like a human milk bank.
Oh, yeah.
And they have this whole program because the preemies need human milk. If they don't have human milk, they can get disastrous gastrointestinal issues and pass away, right? But even a number of very young children can have such an intolerance that it can make them really sick, and then they're not growing. And so a bunch of women are told, when their children have these issues, you should also stop consuming dairy so that the dairy protein is not in your milk when you're breastfeeding your child. And all these women are like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
Not had dairy.
Not only trying to keep this other
Right.
being alive, but then switch how they keep themselves alive at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And there's a direct connection there. Anyway, so the hospital sent all of the milk consultants, like the lactation consultants at the hospital, sent those people to my event. And for many of them, it was, oh, I did not even realize we had this whole universe. And I was featuring local kind of
Interesting.
gourmet cheesemakers and local ice cream makers and also the big brands. And it was a lot of fun. Anyway, dairy's always been my special soft spot. I'm really hoping that we can. And from a health perspective, I really suspect that so many of our issues are connected to this humongous consumption of dairy products. And if we could just replace the calories we consume from dairy with calories from leafy green vegetables. I just made that up right now, but I will check it after the show. I'm almost sure that
I'm pretty
it
sure.
would eradicate practically half of our health problems on this planet. So there. You heard it first.
That's
on
the
Carly's
clip I
podcast.
use. That's the audio clip I use, is just that quote from you. You heard it here. Did you have a love for, or passion really, it feels, for food and for cooking before going vegan?
No, I've always loved eating. And that's a big part of even my brand relative to other like food bloggers out there, if you want to call us that. I don't actually like to cook. I come from a long line of, on the one side, dairy farmers, and on the other side, women that had often many children and really big families. And food was love, and food cooking was so important. And I have this vivid memory of being at in my mother's family kind of Christmas dinner or something, and they give you this mountain of food with this big pile of mashed potatoes and all the beans and the
You're
things.
shaking to try not to drop the plate, it's so heavy.
And you're digging your way to think, I'll see the bottom of the plate somewhere in there, valiantly working at it. And then you see the bottom of the plate and you're so proud of yourself. And some auntie comes by with the mashed potatoes. Your plate is empty. And it would slam the potatoes back on your plate so you could not go starving. And so food has always been a love language. And even my mother was extremely busy. We had the garden center and all the things, but she always made an effort to cook meals. In the early 80s, the options, the alternatives were not that great either compared to what it is today. But I didn't enjoy cooking, but I enjoy hospitality. I see the love in the food. I love this idea of sitting down for a meal with others and sharing. But when I went fully plant-based, when I decided I was going to be vegan, and there were no more excuses, there were no more opportunities to take a shortcut and do something different, I was hit with, what the heck are we going to eat now, right? And there's a bit of panic. My husband was not exactly on board. He loved food. Like, we had bonded over being foodies and we loved all sorts of things. And he was interested. I was like, that's different. But he didn't like how radical it was. So I felt a lot of pressure to make really good food that he would be on board with.
Like you had to prove it.
Yeah, I had to prove that maybe we'll die of malnutrition, but at least it will be good. And then
If that's not convincing.
exactly. You will take a supplement. And then my two kids, my daughter was 3.5, my son was a newborn. I had to feed myself really good food. Anyway, so I felt quite a bit of pressure to get good food on the table. And even when I was working at that time, I would spend so much time looking for food recipes and options and what am I going to put on the meal plan. And I had a bunch of cookbooks because I love books in general, but so I bought a bunch of cookbooks about vegan food and what are we going to do. And I didn't like food waste, so how can we like have meals that
You had
go
that
together.
environmental perspective going in too.
Yeah, but just a good rural family of these, as I was,
Yes.
that same tradition of women that would make ends meet and make sure that every scrap had a purpose. So it was stressful. And
Mhm.
I started trying to simplify my life. And the first thing I did was I created these templates for myself that were Mad Libs, where you fill in the
Mhm.
blanks and tick it some boxes. So I did that, but for a meal plan. And it was like, okay, let's say, I can't remember the details, but let's say Monday, and you can still download them. They're on my website today. Monday is pasta day, and you choose the kind of noodle you're going to use, fill in the blank. Is it a long or a short noodle? And you choose the kind of sauce you're going to use. And maybe the side dish will be X. And so you could tick different boxes. So it would reduce
I
the
love that.
decision fatigue because
Mhm.
the whole problem is decisions. And so many in our rather gendered parenting world, so
Mhm.
many mothers are so tired of having to decide all the things. So that would create a container, and every day was a bit different. And I shared that on a Facebook group saying, hey, anybody like this? And I had a bunch of other people who were interested in meal planning that just loved the printable templates. And so that was my first foray into getting into this, was all about using my project management skills and my system thinking skills, if I could
Mhm.
leverage those to make the everyday life of people that have to decide what's for dinner a little bit easier. Because my mom always said the worst thing, it's not like cooking, it's not doing the dishes, it's deciding what to cook. That's where the mental load, that was not a word that existed in the 80s, but surely today it's
Right.
a thing. We understand it. And I really wanted to help with that. And that's been my approach ever since, is telling people you don't actually need recipes. You need to understand
Mm.
the basic grammar of cooking. And then you can combine the ingredients to make everyday meals. If you want to go wild on Saturday and download some like cool new recipe that you've never made before and spend the time studying it and getting the last weird like chili pepper or something from the so-called ethnic store, fill your boots, that's fine. But on a Wednesday night, that's not going to work. If you're having to follow a recipe closely because you've never done it, and if you have to chop 10 different vegetables and use an appliance you haven't used before, it's not going to work. It's going to be stressful, and that's not the association we want with really good food that's nourishing to us. So that's where I started. So my passion is not food. My passion is being nourished and making sure that other people have the tools to be nourished without all the headaches and the complications that are involved in modern cookery that are not always necessary. Like a lot of that stuff, it's beautiful. I love the creativity of the vegan food bloggers. Somebody created recipes that look like salmon from tofu, and they're beautiful, but it requires beet powder. And there's a lot of steps involved in generating beet powder, and that's not happening on a Wednesday night.
Right.
However, that is how food bloggers make money, is from people like me, you, your listeners, looking at their websites and at the same time looking at the ads. So if you're creating that kind of content, you need to make it appealing, you need to make it original and novel and attract people's eye, and also make us feel like we could do a little bit better than plain food if we do these different things that they're doing. It's the advertising model. And
Right.
again, I'm so grateful for all the food bloggers, but I don't think that's the solution to everyday survival in a healthy vegan kitchen. So that's my different approach to cooking.
I think that's so helpful because as you've worked with people and have done this now for years, but you're not alone in that. You're not alone in wanting to not have to look up a recipe or fix a recipe with some ingredient you've never pronounced on a Tuesday. That's not going to happen. And when I first went vegan and then started posting about it on social media, I was like, oh, okay, I need to be making crazy cool vegan food so people buy into all the other shit I'm talking about, like the environment and the human rights and all the stuff, because I think that's how social media works. I was just like, I did the same thing right before that with yoga. I became certified and I was like, now I'm mindful all the time. And now that's what my content is. And then went vegan, and that's just not how I'm operating all the time. It was inauthentic. And then I went vegan. And I was like, I guess I have to be making like 3 new recipes a week and I'm not a recipe developer. I like to nourish myself, but that's my nightmare actually. And so being okay with being like, I want to eat more plants, but I'm not a chef. I'm not Gordon Ramsay here.
Yeah.
And that's okay, is so much more approachable. And then those other exciting recipes or the other things that seem little wild get to be fun things you try after you have, like you said, the knowledge and like just the verbiage of cooking.
Yeah. I think we need both. In being
Yeah,
very honest with myself here, we need both. It's just like we need different forms of activism. We need,
right.
and there's always people that are going to tone police, vegan activists with the cubes of truth sort of thing that, oh, we
Mm.
shouldn't be showing graphic footage. Well, graphic footage works for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And graphic footage also works with people who are already vegan and need to be more vegan, maybe, that need
Yeah.
to remember why they're vegan. I don't know. And food activism and like super good, tasty stuff
Yes.
works.
Pulls people in. Totally.
Yeah. And then there's the everyday life. And I'm not going to name names, but this is a true story. I was at a really big vegan event, thousands of people, and one of the foremost vegan food bloggers of our times was there and being interviewed about their work. And they were asked, so what do you eat at home, you and your family? And they said, we really just eat the same 3 things all the time. And this is a person who's just published one of those really big cookbooks, right? That has tons of really cool recipes. And they are cool recipes, but at home,
Wow.
everybody, and if you look at somebody, I think I can say that publicly, somebody like Chef AJ, who's very respected health, and she's in the weight loss realm, and she has a lovely book that just came out about decadent desserts, but without sugar,
Mm.
oil, and salt, and published so many recipes. And what does she eat at home? She eats grain bowls, basically, most days of the week, because that is what is sustainable on the long run,
Right.
stuff we can keep to. And we also, I want to highlight this. It's time that we untrain ourselves, we wean ourselves from needing an explosion of flavor in our mouth all the time. We have to discover that plain, and I say plain, it sounds like it's a bad word, but no, but plain vegetables and beans and grains taste something and they taste good. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
learn to appreciate the subtleties of them, and where they were grown makes a difference. And it's true that a lot of the industrial production, like vegetables we eat, the soils are quite depleted. It's not maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago where growing a vegetable in different soils would you could taste the difference. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's generally not the case so much anymore, unless you're buying your vegetables from like small farmers market places where they really care about the soil and this and that. But still, a carrot tastes like a carrot. And there's something to appreciate in that. But if we eat a lot of restaurant food, it's heavily salted, heavily swimming in oil, and often, very often, more than we think, has sugar added. And I'm not
Yes.
saying sugar is bad. It's not that I'm against sugar. There's a place for everything. But those ingredients are flavor multipliers. And when we put them in our mouth, it goes, whoa, this is interesting. And we love this and we want more. And the job of the restaurant is to have us come back. And heaven knows that the restaurant business is so difficult that they want us to go back and spend again. And I get it, but it's not necessarily the best thing for our health.
Right.
And when we can just let go of that need always. And I won't lie, there's a transition there because if you stop eating at restaurants tomorrow, you're going to find your food really boring for about a month if you're not having those explosions, those explosive ingredients added to your food. But then you start to appreciate it a lot more. The downside is when you eat out the next time, you might actually come out of there feeling really heavy and thinking, oh, that was hard to eat and I don't really want to eat that again. And now you're stuck having to cook your own dinner.
And that's when the vegan family kitchen comes in.
There you go. And that's why I have a business. But the reality is that the biggest in Canada, the two big food delivery companies, there's Uber Food, but the other two, one of them is called Just Eat. And the other one is called Skip the Dishes. And those are genius branding.
Solid marketing meetings there.
Because people just want to eat and skip the dishes, right? We can talk about the dishes some other time. I've learned to love doing the dishes. If you want to talk about mindfulness, there's so much meditation that can be had in the experience of washing the dishes. And I have to say that I actually enjoy washing the dishes if they're mine. I'm not going to go to other people's home to wash their dishes, but I'm okay doing mine.
Before people start asking.
Yes, I will take the calls at the end of this. When I write blog posts, when I make YouTube videos, when I design a course, so I coach somebody, you never know really what's good enough. You never know if it's like perfect in the sense of having been completed in the best possible way. When I do the dishes, there's a pile of dirty stuff on my right, and then it goes in the hot soapy water, and the water's really hot, but it feels good and calming in a way, and I can appreciate that experience of having the hot water and not having had to go fetch it a long ways away, which is still the job of women all over the world. And then the dishes are done and the countertop is void of dirty stuff, and my job is finished. And not often in life do we get this in this modern world. And that's an aspect of the practice of what I call flow in the kitchen, of appreciating those moments that on the one hand, you want to skip the dishes. I've got that in me too. But if I'm going to have to do the dishes anyway, might as well put my whole being into it, find an appreciation for that. And what else could have I been doing? I could have been scrolling social media. And how good would that have been for me? It's a lifestyle, it's a practice, but it's really worth it to engage with making our own food. Well, I recommend it.
So when you started that journey of, okay, I have a newborn and I have to feed myself and a 3.5-year-old daughter, I'm curious if there was a lane that was more difficult for you. Was it harder to have plant-based foods and figure out I'm feeding the children? This is different than what I understand. Or was it harder to maybe feed yourself, or was it all really hard?
It was all really hard. I mean, it wasn't, I don't know. The hardest thing, and I have a lot of sympathy for anybody who's trying to go vegan today or go more plant-based. I think the hardest thing for most people is still the social friction that's involved in making choices that even when you know you're making the right choices, when you've come to the conclusion that eating beans and vegetables is a good idea instead of eating animals. Anyway, it's revolutionary ideas. Yeah, exactly. So when you have that idea and you're like, yeah, that's the right thing to do, it's unbelievable how, revolutionary or contrarian those ideas will seem to other people that have established ideas about what food is supposed to be like and what in particular is the place of animals in that diet. And I find that the most challenging part is developing that comfort with this discomfort. right? The tolerance for being in an uncomfortable conversation, uncomfortable situation. And I have a big part of me that doesn't care a whole lot about what other people think. So that was a little bit easier for me. I have that strand in me of not being too worried about it. So I was okay with that. But then we'd go out at a restaurant and still negotiating what this is going to look like with my husband, who wasn't vegan at the time. Now he eats fully plant-based. I don't think he would get a vegan tattoo, but he's very much on board
I
and
love
will
that, the
not eat
marker.
animals. Yeah, there's a distinction there, but he's fully plant-based and doesn't buy animal products as much as he can, right? But he just hates making other people uncomfortable. And so we'd go to a restaurant and I would start to try
That
to get
dance.
stuff, yeah, with the server going, so you have this, can we change it this way? And my husband would like sink under the table. What is she doing again? Everybody's looking at us. That poor server is going to think blah, blah, blah. So having that tolerance for discomfort also in social situation with my in-laws, for example, my mother-in-law makes, and it was that first time I said I loved steaks, right? So we would still, so in that first couple of years when I decided to go plant-based at home, I would eat whatever in the family environment. And so at my in-laws is where I was having the steak because they would very often have really nice steaks on the barbecue in summer. And there was that one day when we got there and I said, actually, I won't have the steak. And I don't care if I'm only having potatoes. It's not like I'm going to starve because I'm only having potatoes today. It's not like I'm having, but it makes everybody very uncomfortable. And I get that coming from that family of all the women that were caring so much about food. I get that it was really uncomfortable for them, but I was like, it's just my choice. And that's what I decide to do. You eat the steak, not a problem.
Yeah.
But developing the tolerance for that friction is definitely a skill and it takes a while. And for me, I had built up to there. And I'd say after probably a couple of years, I was, whatever. And the social acceptability of veganism around here. I live in Vancouver, Canada. It is not actually true that the whole city is this environmentally friendly paradise, but there's a lot of vegan options and it's accepted as generally a good thing to be vegan, right? But I have some people I work with that are in very different environments that have a lot more resistance from loved ones and family and friends for various reasons, some of which are truly coming from a place of care, and some of the reasons that are coming from indoctrination, I guess you could say, or just not caring, or anyway, so not a happy place. And it's really hard for them. And they're not necessarily able to go all the way as I've gone because they just don't want to break down all these relationships. Not everybody is able to say, the heck with you, I'll just find a different husband. If that was not my case ever, but some people feel like their relationships are going to break down if they don't eat the same food. It's a journey for everybody, but that was definitely the hardest part. And I think it's the hardest part for most people. And because of that, having always the uncertainty around, is the food I'm eating actually nutritious? Is it actually good? Am I not deficient in something? And I was mentioning being a bike commuter, so that definitely helped me build a tougher skin. But breastfeeding was the same, right? Because when you have a breastfeeding woman, even if we know that breast is best and all the things, right? Whenever the kid is sick or something, in so many environments, the first question is it really the right thing to be breastfeeding? Is this child deficient? Is the milk good enough? Should we be giving this formula that's been engineered to be like better and like modern feeding? It's still very present. And so the first thing is always, if the child is unwell, then it must be the breast milk. And in the same way, if a vegan is unwell, it's always, how's your diet? And how many vegetables do you eat, dude? But
yeah, seriously, I'm always so worried about people's fiber intake after a few questions. I'm like, are you okay? I wasn't eating enough fiber.
When was the last time you had a poop?
I know. I'm like, do you need to go to the doctor?
Exactly. But having that doubt, having that self-doubt, am I doing okay? Am I feeding my children okay? And worrying about that can be really grating because we have other things to do in life than just worrying about the food we eat.
I think that's such a good point and calls for the importance of community online or in person for doing this, even if you have a buddy to talk to that gets this. because those social aspects, you're so right. It's one thing to learn how to eat more beans, but it's another thing to be able to have those hard conversations with your family members who go, "What the hell are you talking about?" And that's their intro, right? So that's such a good point, and I think is probably a reason people want to be in a group with you, a vegan cooking group, or to have that support even, just because not only is talking about food helpful, talking about what to do in some of these other aspects is really helpful with others too. You don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. And you've just opened the door for me. So I'm going to go right in. And I want to talk about Cooking Club because it's so awesome.
Yes.
Because the key for me, as I was saying, the sustainability aspect of that is to keep it simple. But the other aspects, if you want to eat healthy vegan food and reduce the amount of ready-made, fully processed food, and I'm not saying that vegan meats are bad with a capital B and all that, but I just prefer to have beans and to have
Yeah.
tofu and those sorts of things than have the stuff that comes out of a package. And if you want to eat those more homemade components, I mean, it would be largely the same if you were eating meat. But the thing is, it's really easy to make meat taste good because naturally it's very fatty compared to carrots or chickpeas. And it's also usually quite salty, just not naturally. A lot of the meat has a sodium solution injected to it. And so it tastes quite salty and it has a lot of flavor. Getting chickpeas to taste good takes a little bit more skill. So when you want to have those tasty meals in the weekdays, it's really helpful to do batch cooking on the weekends. To
Mm.
have even just an hour, 90 minutes, most weekends, to create some building blocks that you can then enjoy throughout the week. Because just our lifestyles in North America are not really well suited to putting a lot of effort in everyday cooking.
Capitalism really
And
gets in the way.
yeah, there's always something. But there's always something on the weekend as well.
Yes.
And
Yes.
having two young children, there's a ton of birthday parties that we're supposed to attend and activities, and then you want to see your family, and sometimes you're traveling and all the things. I have a meal planning service. Part of the meal plans is that you're supposed to do your batch cooking on the weekends. And I was not doing my own batch cooking. It was a bit embarrassing. Half the time, there would be something that would get in the way, and I wouldn't do it. And again, going for the public accountability, I had this genius
I
idea of
love
creating a
that.
cooking club on Zoom. And I did have cooking club in person before the pandemic, and that was super fun, but that was more social educational kind of thing.
Yeah.
And with the Zoom version starting in January 2022, the idea was that people who were my clients who were using the meal plans would get together on Zoom, and I wouldn't be teaching. I'm doing my batch cooking. I need to do it too, and you need to do it. So let's just get together and have this kind of social moment
Wow.
and reinforcement of each other and being in. There's this, I think it's called the curler effect. I can't remember, where when you're part of a team, you don't want to be holding the team back, right? And so being in this group, you're like, oh, I have to pull my weight and I have to do my cooking too. And it just, you get so much more done in a small period of time. And I started doing that and it was great. But even though 50 people were signed up, sometimes there would be like two people coming. It was just
Yeah.
a little, there's a lot that gets in the way of batch cooking. And I decided at the end of 2022 to make the cooking club free. It used to be a paid program. And now it's free. Anybody can come as long as they're cooking plants. I don't care if
Hmm.
they're following my meal plans or not. A lot of people there are
Yeah.
following the meal plans, but not everybody. And now we tend to be 20 plus people at every gathering. And
Wow.
it's so awesome. And I'm cooking my food. I'm not cooking as much as if I was not the host because I make sure
Yeah.
that there's no tech issues and stuff, but my batch cooking gets done. I get to speak to these other people. I hear them answering each other's questions, and many of them are a lot more strict from a health perspective than I am. There's
Mm.
no sugar, no salt, no oil, no SOS. So they give each other tips, and most of them are in blended families where, let's just say, the other people don't care so much about the food.
Hmm.
So it's that special place where everybody agrees that food matters. It's that special place where
Mm.
you don't need to defend yourself about your choice of eating black beans instead of pig flesh in your
Mm-hmm.
tacos, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so validating and it feels so good. And there's accountability. And I think probably in the last 10,000 years since we've been cooking, a little more than that, there's been a lot of collective cooking. And now we all live in our little boxes and we don't get to cook with other people very much. When I think of my aunties and those famous Christmas dinners, the aunties would be in the kitchen for hours together.
Yeah.
And it was not just about cooking, it was about the gossip, about
Yeah,
about
100%.
building community and caring and loving and all that. So it's on Zoom. It's different. We each do our own dishes, but it's been really integral to my quality of life. I have not missed a batch cooking session. Even we were on vacation a little while ago, but we were renting a vacation rental. And I did cooking club. I was like, oh, it's scheduled. I guess I gotta go and we're gonna eat. So I might as well do it. And it was fantastic. And I'm so glad I did.
Oh, I want to pop in to cooking club.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's every other Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So just go to veganfamilykitchen.com/cooking-club to register and get all the info. And yeah, everybody's welcome. It's just my happy place on the internet.
Oh, I love that so much. And what a perfect segue in, because it really does highlight the benefit of community in this. And if people are out there looking for that space specifically to feel, like you said, validated too, where you get to show up and go, I don't have to explain to you why I'm doing this or why I'm cooking this or why I chose this. I just get to do it and you understand. And that's pretty amazing.
It's really fun. And I know some people walk out of cooking club and they take their food. One of the members who is just recovering from cancer treatment, and she had, following the cooking club, she was visiting with her family. And then she wrote me an email. She said, everybody I spoke with was basically saying, what, you still cook your own food? We don't cook ever. Why do you need to do that? And it's shocking, but at the same time, it completely jives with the actual stats where you see things like, I think 19 of 20 Americans, and Canadians are about the same, don't have 5 portions of fruit and vegetables per day, right? Because they're just eating stuff that comes from restaurants, and vegetables are complicated to manage for restaurants. So there's not a lot of them. They're expensive. Rice noodles are cheaper. So if you order pad thai from a restaurant, it's going to have a lot of rice noodles, but not a ton of broccoli, right? So it's just, if we're not careful, I'm quite concerned that we're really, in the same way that growing our own food is no longer part of the vast majority of people's lives. And I get it. I'm not saying anybody should be growing their own food. It's nice if you do it, but it's a very big challenge, especially in urban life. But cooking your own food, I don't think we can afford to let that go, because the consequences on our health of eating commercially, the kinds of food that is commercially viable is not the kind of food that is viable in terms of our health, right? And if we let that go, and it happens really quick, skip a generation, and those skills are gone. And I want to be the auntie and the mother of all the people on the internet that haven't had a chance to learn how to cook. And they want to have that vision that it's still possible to cook and to find meaning in that and to just do it.
What I appreciate about the way you talk about veganism is that it's so clear you're making that connection to self, right? That connection to what I'm doing here in this kitchen is connected to what's going on out there in the world. And do you think that came from your experience with environmentalism coming into veganism? You were a strong bike commuter, ready to fight on the mean streets.
I've been hit by a car. A lot of bike commuters have been hit by a car. It's a foundational experiment. You get a different kind of tattoo, the one from Road Rash.
You took the
scars
words right out of my mouth. I was like, does that come with a tattoo?
Yeah, it does, but it's one that's usually a bit random. Anyway, I don't want to scare anybody. Bike commuting is great. I don't have to do it right now. I work from home. Where I think I had my biggest epiphanies in terms of the connection with the food comes more from a Buddhist perspective, and specifically the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh and these ideas. He did not invent those, but he's played a big role in making them more easy to absorb for our modern Western society, especially the ideas around interbeing and seeing how our bodies are so intricately and profoundly and incontrovertibly connected to everything else. And when you look deep into your food, you can see where it comes from and whether or not you want to eat it, right? And that's definitely a part that's more related to veganism, especially when you look at animal products and the immense amount of suffering that went into them. And I want to highlight that when I came into this, as I said, I was coming for environmental reasons and then animal rights kinds of reasons. And I'm going to say it honestly, I thought that vegans were overblowing the health claims, saying those things to convince people that it was better.
Same, because I was like, well, then why aren't we all doing this?
Yeah, they're gonna be making this up. And the truth is, you can have very vegan food that's not particularly healthy, right? So I'm not saying vegan food is always healthy, though generally, I think as a rule of thumb, I think and we're starting to see the science, it's still better to eat even like vegan processed meats compared to the alternatives. Roughly, of course, if you're eating a steady diet of Oreo cookies, which are accidentally vegan, it doesn't make you necessarily healthier. Anyway, but so in the process of that, unfortunately my father started suffering with dementia to the point where he passed away in 2020. And I've been spending a lot more time looking at the health aspects since maybe the last 5 years of this whole diet thing. And I'm always horrified, but at the same time, I don't know what else I was expecting, at how the medical community as a whole, and even largely to this day, but it's improving, thought there's no connection between what we eat and how we are in our health. And one example I was reading about just last week, Martha Claire Morris, not a vegan, but she's the scientist who came up with the MIND diet, which is the diet to prevent Alzheimer's disease, basically. And when she started her work in the 90s, early 90s, nobody thought there could possibly be any connection between what happens in the brain and the food we eat. There could not be a dietary connection. And I know that's just a paradigm that they had in those days, right? But when you think about it and you look deeply into your food and you look deeply into your body, our bodies are constantly renewing themselves. We know that every cell we have, there's very few cells in our bodies that have been there since we were born. Every cell gets replaced, like all the time. Sometimes some cells are turned over in a few hours, a few days. Some of them take a few months, things like the bones, more structural. But every cell pretty much is renewed multiple times during our lifetimes. And they don't get renewed out of nothing. They get renewed from the material that we've ingested primarily. Some of it, unfortunately, also comes from what we breathe. And unfortunately, it's not always the best air that we're breathing. There's nauseous substances that get in there as well. But for the most part, it's the food we put in our mouths that becomes the building blocks of our blood vessels and our skin and our bones and the whole thing. Doesn't it make sense to try to actually bring in building blocks to begin with, as opposed to bring in jackhammers that are going to take things apart with oxide? Like, when you think about it, it's obvious.
Yes.
And once you realize how those plants that we eat have grown with the minerals and the soil and the sunlight and the rain, and this became a plant that we're now ingesting and that becomes our bodies. And you can't really feel totally lonely anymore when you realize how connected you are to everything that is. And that's been the other beautiful outcome. I wasn't expecting to start thinking those thoughts when I first became vegan, but really, now I can feel so much more comfortable being part of that chain. And it is not perfect. There's a lot of issues with the food system. But I'm so glad I'm avoiding some of the worst ones and some of the worst suffering that is happening on Earth, which is what's happening in farms and slaughterhouses. That stuff bypasses my body, and I'm not built from it. And that's such a relief.
Thank you for sharing that about your father, and I'm sorry to hear that as well. I relate so much because my introduction to veganism was through my own health first. It turns out I'm not a baby cow, and dairy wasn't
What?
really jiving for me. And then one of my grandmas was diagnosed with dementia, and she has since passed, and now the other grandma has passed from dementia. And
Oh,
one of them I was kind of part-time caregiver for there for a little bit, and it changed me. And it changed how I look at bodies and health in a very different way. Yeah, it was cool to not shit my brains out when I ate food anymore because I wasn't having dairy. That was great. That was a plus for sure.
big improvement.
Big improvement.
5-star review.
But it could get it even better. And so I read The Alzheimer's Solution by Dean and Aisha Sherzai, and I was like, okay, that locked in nutrition. I was already the environment, the animal stuff had fallen too.
Yeah.
But that locked in nutrition for me personally in such a different way. And so I just relate to that so much when you watch it and you learn because you don't want to keep watching that.
It's I'm actually this fall, I'm teaching a new program at a local community center, and that's taking me outside my comfort zone because it's not going to be my crowd. It's local people. Most of them will not have had that many thoughts about diet before, or maybe they've read some materials that I may not agree with. But it's called Preventing Dementia with Plants. And it's
Wow.
focused on cooking for brain health. And I want to bring together the more theoretical aspects of what causes most dementias is basically heart disease, right? It's the same problem. And what kind of food, and I want to get into the cooking hands-on. I'm expecting to have probably more women there, more people who are cooking for loved ones. And so getting into that. And it's a topic I'm so passionate about for the same reasons as you. And I'm also sorry about your grandmother's, and it's defeating to see that problem and the scale of it. We're looking at 10% of people over 65 that live with dementia. 40% of people are living over 85. Like, I don't want to be 85 and not having my brain with me anymore. But really, at 40%, the odds are not good. And
Not
everybody
good.
would like to think it will be other people, but it won't be other people. It's going to be us. We're going to be having the micro strokes in our brains that are going to shut down some areas that are quite important, and some memories will go away, and how we do things. So I see that at the core also of our planetary and environmental issues,
Mm,
in the sense that we are currently in developed countries spending roughly 25 to 35% and more of our money on healthcare.
yep.
Right? And a lot of that healthcare, and a growing part of that, heart disease is huge, diabetes, all the things, everybody knows that. I mean,
Food
they should.
related.
But dementia is a growing part of that pie. And the care, you've just mentioned having to caring for your grandmother, the human cost and financial cost of having to care for all of those people that are still needing to be loved and cared for, but just incapable of taking care of themselves for so many years. And it's so heart-wrenching. And while we're doing that, we have to keep on trashing the planet faster and faster so we can afford to pay for the
Yes.
healthcare. That's gross. That is
Yeah.
not okay.
Yeah, it sucks.
And that is where I think I have lots of sympathy for vegans who say that I do it for the animals, I don't care about my health. Good for you for being altruistic, but start caring about your health, because if you're not caring for it, somebody else will have to take care of you later, and that will suck big time. And not only you won't be able to be an animal activist anymore, but you will be directly, basically part of the burden. It's
Yeah.
as human by virtue of being born, we're just consuming machines. We trash a lot along the way, but if we can just keep our footprint a little bit smaller, and definitely avoiding dementia is a good way to reduce our environmental footprint. So let's connect the dots and see the big picture and see how it's not just about individual health. It's not just selfish to want to
Mm,
be healthy, though it can be, but it has massive societal implications. So let's eat broccoli.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Eat broccoli. More broccoli. Yes.
There you
And
go.
and I'm so excited too. about the possibility of, oh, there's new medication, there's new things that can be done, and specifically dementia or any other disease, of course. But it's also just, it blows my mind because I'm like, but what if we ate more vegetables?
Yeah,
Just
living
a
in
silly little
British
thought.
Columbia, here we have a lot of issues right now about countryside ER emergency rooms having to close down on weekends because there's not enough doctors. And I always want to say, instead of thinking we don't have enough doctors, why don't we think that we have too many sick people?
Yes.
I don't know, just flipping the problem on its head, right? And yes, of course, you can't heal a broken arm with just broccoli, right? You need that. You don't want to be ignoring a blood infection and get sepsis. I love antibiotics. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But when you have any health emergency arising, it's made so much more complicated if you also have heart disease, diabetes, dementia, and all the other things, right? Even pregnancy becomes a lot more dangerous and complicated when you have chronic disease layers underlaying it. So let's just try to reduce that burden. But this being said, I don't have a ton of hope at the macro scale because on this day, still, what makes money in the economy is not home cooking. What makes money in the economy is not having healthy people. We're still in denial about the horrendous cost of chronic disease. And so until we kind of politically realize that it's no longer viable to be making most of our money from pharmaceuticals, because there's, and in industrial food production, because the human cost is too high, we still have ways to go. Here we are talking about it, and somebody's listening to us for the first time and thinking, yeah, they got a point. I'll start taking care of myself and eating more broccoli.
Yes. Yes, I really do. We're manifesting that. Someone's eating more broccoli tonight for sure after this interview.
Yeah.
I feel like I could chat with you about these things for a long time. In fact, I know I could. I would love to have you on again in the future, especially after that program you do. I'd love to hear more about how that goes, maybe, and some takeaways and any of that. But in the interest of time, is there anything you wanted to share with listeners that I didn't give you space to do?
I just want people to remember that cooking is love in action, love for the self, love for the people we cook with, we cook for, love for the world at large. It's such a beautiful, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a simple thing we do. And yeah, it's a little bit of work, but what's the alternative? So I just want to invite people to cook more often. If they want to get inspired and do it with a group, come to Cooking Club. I will be delighted to have you. And there's a bazillion resources on my website that people can download for free. But if you're confused, there's a little chat box at the bottom. And I actually had somebody this week that clicked the chat button and she started typing and I was responding to her. And then she wrote, "Are you an AI?" I'm like, I don't know how she could have believed that because my answers were really not AI. But I was like, no, I'm a real person. And I just love it when somebody writes to me and says, this is my vision to be a healthier person and help me get there. And I'll bend over backwards to support anybody in being better, healthier, because when we're healthier, we can show up in the world to contribute towards making the world a better place. So thank you for caring. Thank you for caring about cooking. It makes a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. This was really a delight.
My pleasure. Anytime. Let's do it again. And next time, let's try to cook something together. Soup.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share on social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time. stay consciously clueless.